The Centre Pompidou is really a pluridisciplinaire institution. It means that in this house we can enjoy all the different aspects of the creative process.
Well, there's only one Centre Pompidou, and it is really a cultural mixing pot. It's an iconic structure. It comes out of very close colleagues, so it has a certain association with my generation. I was there at the inauguration of the building with the architects. So in that sense, it's very special.
First, I met Norman through books, through, of course, as an historian, through his presence in the history of architecture. And I met strangely Norman in person lately, because I received a phone call from him directly, and I was very surprised. Said, "Hello, I am Norman Foster, and I would like to know if it's possible to visit the Tadao Ando exhibition." And I say, "Oh, I will be very pleased to introduce you to this exhibition." And he came with Elena Foster, and I made a full visit of the exhibition. And at the end of the visit, I understood it was informal, that the desire to do something like this was present. It's why 3 months after, I asked for a personal meeting to Norman in London, and we began to speak about the opportunity to do something together.
Pompidou is about breaking down the barriers between the different disciplines, the visual arts, film, photography, painting, sculpture, architecture, design. And the exhibition that we created for that venue is similarly about design in a broader sense. So it's about issues of the city, master planning. It's about artifacts, vehicles, flying machines. It's about beauty, it's about function, it's about the common denominators that bring these different aspects of design together. So there is a synergy between the mission of Centre Pompidou and the exhibition that we created for that venue.
To host the Norman Foster's exhibition at the Pompidou is really a very specific moment.
The concept behind the exhibition was to show a wide range of work over a long period of time, but also to communicate to an audience that really in the visual arts that there are very powerful connections.
We made the first project for the SARS Gallery here at the Pompidou on 800 meters square. And speaking with Norman and Elena, we understood that it was important to show the drawings. And Norman wanted to show the drawings, and it was necessary to extend a little bit the space of exhibition. And at the end, the president of the Pompidou offered us to work not on 800 meters square, but on the Gallery 1 on 2,200 meters square.
It's unique in the history of the Pompidou Center that we dedicate the Gallery 1, which is the most important in the Pompidou Center, to an architect.
And we had the opportunity to develop this cabinet of drawing, cabinet de dessin, and to be in the art of the conception of the work of Norman. On one side, all the original drawing made by Norman himself, and not all, but some notebooks, 300 from a collection of 2,000, and photographs as a kind of a memory of the real he developed along his life.
And so we are very happy to have this fantastic moment where we can discover really a unique universe and a global comprehensive journey into the mind of Normans.
It was difficult for me to understand how the public, a larger public who don't know a word about architecture, could be interested by drawings of architecture, which are really abstract and conceptual. And it was absolutely fascinating at the opening to see people staying a long time in the room and to be completely involved in the way of thinking of Norman. And it was the major part of the exhibition, and it was the way to re-articulate all the conception and the distribution of concept, the 7 main concepts we have to organize the topography of the show.
The entrance to the exhibition is here, and symbolically, the Millau Viaduct leads you into the first gallery. This gallery is devoted to sketches and drawings. The drawings here start in 1956. That's Manchester University. They move on to Yale University, and they track through the practices of Team 4, of Foster and Partners, and the foundation. The idea of entering through a gallery about sketches and drawings is really the importance of the sketch and the fact that it's the start of so many of the designs that you will see in the main gallery that follows. Then what are the influences going back in time to the 1960s? And the 1960s was arguably the birth of what we now call the Green Movement. So the early works and everything that followed really can be related back to these early influences. The reactions to seeing so many projects over such a long period of time, well, 7 decades, it reinforces the reality that architecture is very much a team activity. So it was an opportunity to pay tribute to the many thousands of people who've come together over those 7 decades. So we've come from the darkened space of the sketches, and literally the space expands here.
This exhibition dedicated to the life and the world of Norman Foster is really different. First, in the scale. I think it's really, let's say in one word, a big show. But when something is big, sometimes it could be complicated. But in this show, it's really a tribute to the architecture of the Pompidou Center. The space is free, and we have the entire surface dedicated to the world of Norman, and with a very specific dialogue between works of art and models, which makes really this adventure unique.
If you begin to work around the production of Norman Foster, you think, what are the seminal buildings? What are the iconic buildings you need to have in a book, in an exhibition? And you begin to make the list, and immediately you have 90 buildings. And the complexity was to extend the vision on his work and to have another kind of another approach of the work. Going through the text written, I understood that there is something hidden in the work, none avoid. And it was the idea of the notion of the theory of systems. And it changed completely my scope, not to understand the work through the notion of high-tech, and going through the development of the work through years. And this notion of systems comes to me as absolutely determinant.
Working with Frédéric Migayrou, the curator, he encouraged the division of the exhibition into a number of sections. And the opening one is nature and urbanity, and makes the point that they're really connected, encouraging density, preserving nature, avoiding sprawl, setting in a way the stage for the wider exhibition itself. And here we have the early projects of Team 4, starting in 1963, and again very much about preserving the landscape. Dense clusters, but with privacy ensured by design. And then there's an inevitable transition, almost seamless, of the projects of the practice, starting with Foster Associates, to really the birth of the present practice of Foster and Partners. This project for Reliance Controls was a transitional project from the Team 4 practice to the present practice, and is very much the birth of a systems approach to design, the integration of systems. This project was a pioneering project, both socially and technologically. This small amenity center, which brought together dockers and office workers, was revolutionary. It introduced open plan materials that were about conserving energy. It incorporated heat recovery. These were truly revolutionary in the very early 1970s. So going back in time to these early projects of the late 1960s, the early 1970s, how to communicate some of the ideas which at that time were really revolutionary. They're now much more mainstream. Harvesting energy through solar, through wind power, recycling waste to human waste to fertilizer. So I developed with the model making team the idea of a diorama. So you can start to see the dialogue between the systems in the model and the sketches of that period. In the theme of nature and urbanity and how do you relate to a landscape, this very first project, the first in 1963, of digging in a small gazebo into the landscape, has its reverberations many decades later in the Air Museum for Duxford, which is also a memorial to the American airmen who lost their lives in World War II. And again, dug into the landscape in the same way the National Botanical Gardens of Wales or an elephant house in Copenhagen, all deferring to the landscape. Still under the theme of nature and urbanity, we have Masdar, which is a series of experiments, but essentially it's a community, a research university in the desert in Abu Dhabi, and working with the climate, learning from traditional dwellings, and then combining that with the cutting-edge technology of solar power. And so it is today still that experiment 24 hours every day of the year and totally solar powered as a research community.
The exhibition is like a door open to the works and which give to the public an opportunity to have an extended understanding of this research developed through 60 years. And better, as I spoke about, you can't exhaust the work through an exhibition. The work has to be developed and will be exhausted or never exhausted by critics, historians, other exhibitions and so on, because there is too much sense in the work. And a great work of art, a great work Carré in the Carrière is a work which resists to the critics and to the historian.
There's a transition in the exhibition from one subject of nature and urbanity to the vertical city. And you could say that the high-rise building is emblematic of the modern age, of the modern high-density city. Along the way, we try to show some insights into the process of design, the exploration that might be in sketches and drawings, as we talked earlier, but it might be in models which explore different aspects of the design. Here, a high-rise bank in Kuwait. This is a model of the Commerzbank Tower. It was conceived in the late 1980s, realized in the early 1990s. And it is the first breathing building, the first naturally ventilated high-rise building. This design, which I did as a student at Yale when I was doing my master's in the 1960s, that I eliminated the conventional central core, was really the basis of the future Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank Tower in Hong Kong, which for the first time in a high-rise building eliminated the traditional central core of structure and services and instead fragmented it and put it on the edges of a completely flexible loft-like space. This tower was conceived for Swiss Re in London. Again, in London it was revolutionary. It's a breathing building, the facade opens up, air movement is encouraged through the spiral. So it's working really like an aircraft wing, creating opposing pressures, low pressure, high pressure, drawing air through the building, reducing the energy consumption and also making it a healthier building for the occupant. This tower for Hearst at the time, in sustainability terms, was pioneering. And at a completely different visual level, there is a certain resonance between these diagridded, faceted structures and the early Brancusi endless column with its beautifully proportioned rhomboid shapes. You could say, in many ways, that we have in anticipating the future, reinvented the nature of the workplace, reinvented what a high-rise building is.
I worked a lot on the sources of Norman, and I was always fascinated by his ability to absorb anything. And I think it's important now for this retrospective to organize a new overview on his work, because his work is famous through buildings, of course, which are iconic all over the world. The project for me was to understand the deep understanding he had in architecture since the beginning of his involvement in this world, when he was very young, of course. And there is a continuity in his researches, and there is a south. And I was mainly interested by the south of Norman Foster.
It was a distinguished critic who said that you could divide all of our projects into two categories, skin and bones. Either that the building is an expression of its skin, its external envelope, perhaps smooth and streamlined, or that it might be the expression of the bones. And you can find the same analogies in the world of sculpture, automobiles, aircraft, very much about the 1913, anticipating the wind tunnel that would streamline revolutionary vehicles like Buckminster Fuller's Dymaxion car. I worked with Fuller, affectionately known by his friends as Bucky, for the last 12 years of his life. So my creation of this authentic version was really homage to my mentor. And he's perhaps well known for the Dymaxion structures, the diagridded structures which you can see here in the solar house that we worked on together, unrealized but hugely influential as a prototype, and also at the time the so-called fly's eye dome, which resolved the structure of a triangulated structure but with openings that would transmit light and also air. So again, these are research exercises into an architecture which would work with nature, which would reduce the amount of energy. There's an anticipation here of a future still to come.
Sometimes you make a division between architecture and other parts of the world of art. But I think with this show, you can enjoy it aesthetically, like a show of an artist. But you can also, if you take time, really be, for the first time, inside the creative process of what does it mean for one man to produce such a huge amount of projects so different. And I think it's the balance between the inside story and finally just the pure pleasure to discover what is a model. You are really in the spirit of what is the specificity of an exhibition in the Pompidou Center.
Over the 12 years of our working together, one concept unrealized was the idea of climatrophis. And climatrophis would be like a big, almost transparent, structural, filigree structure that would transmit light, air, and within that environment there would be nature, greenery, trees. It was a kind of utopian vision of the workplace of the future. As we move along the models in this part of the exhibition, we're continuing the theme of skin and bones. And the bones, the arch of Wembley Stadium, is not only emblematic and symbolic of that historic past, but it's literally the very structure expressed that is holding it up. By contrast, this complex of musical spaces for the performance arts, the Sage in the north of England, is by contrast very much about the skin, the voluptuous form. And as we move from that to the Sainsbury Centre, very much the expression of the skin of the building and only its bones, its structure, revealed at the ends, like an extrusion. I was encouraged by Frédéric, the curator of the exhibition, to create this model of what he sees as a very important project from the past. Unbuilt, it was a house in Hampstead, and as you can see, it's very much about the expression of the structure, and incidentally has a certain resonance with the structure of this building, which you can see outside. Renault, again, a very clear expression of a suspension structure, and an element of it here, kind of writ large, recreation of the corner module. This is an exploratory project by the foundation team. We call it the Grasshopper, and it's part infrastructure, part of the pedestrian route of this Chateau Lacoste in Provence. And here this is in effect an observation platform, but it's again very much the bones of the structure and touches the nature very, very lightly. Almost in the same way that this table, which has certain affinities with the lunar explorer of the late 1960s, again touching the ground lightly and very much an expression of its structure. I've always been fascinated by the streamlined forms of airships, of zeppelins. And there's a certain unconscious resonance between that as a flying machine, and this air-supported structure, a temporary building for a firm called Computer Technology. We literally unwrapped this as a cube of fabric, and it was inflated to be the first of its kind as an office building.
Norman Foster works on any kind of program. All the programs developed by architects were at a certain moment absorbed in the work of Norman Foster. In urbanism, in technology, any kind of program, offices, museums, any kind, high-rise tower, and also for urbanism. The idea of the public space, the idea of the community are very strong. The notion of the city, extended city, the notion of networks at the world level, all those dimensions are in the work. And to specify, are they specifically treated by Norman, understood by Norman, it's very complex because it touches any dimensions of the work of an architect.
This diorama is showing a project called Willis Faber. There's a dialogue with Ben Jonson's painting of the period, and it's reimagining the workplace with amazing roof gardens, landscape, great restaurants, movement by escalators in the sunlight, a mega swimming pool, the introduction of flexi time so that members of the family can come along and out of hours use the pool, the facilities. So very much about a lifestyle, anticipating a lifestyle of the future. And this, of course, is in the early 1970s.
For me, Willis Faber is just the extension of the climate office, realized in a very realistic way, but this is an accomplishment and everything is already in this building. All the extension, all the projects which will be developed later are in this building. Willis Faber, for me, is a key building.
This is the headquarters for Apple in Cupertino, California. You can see here the before model, 24 buildings, car park, tarmac, virtually no landscape, and its transition into one large building, which, yes, it's physically large, but in concept, it's really compact because it's bringing everybody, those many thousands, under one roof for creative connectivity, and it's freeing the landscape for 10,000 new trees, acres of vegetation, trails in the landscape for hiking, for walking, for cycling. And perhaps it looks inevitable as a circular building in the landscape, but that was really, as you can see here, an insight into the process. These were the exploratory studies that occupied perhaps some 9 months of time before the circle emerged as something that would answer Steve Jobs' ideal for what he called an internal pod. If the Apple Park was very much about how you create a healthy, breathing building in a suburban setting, then the challenge was even greater for the Bloomberg headquarters in the middle of a busy city. And here you can see the external kind of grills which shade the exterior, but these are also filtering the air, attenuating the noise from the traffic outside. And so this breathing building, the air is moving from the perimeter to the very heart. And in this model, you can see that the heart is a spiral pedestrian movement within the building, encouraging people to creatively engage with each other informally. So it's very much about the environmental systems, the ecology of the building, but also creating a better working environment. And the combination of a ceiling which was created for that project, designed specifically, reducing the energy dramatically, and working acoustically to enable the floors throughout to be warm timber.
For me, there is an important phenomenon in the work of Norman. This is the continuity. Everything is at the beginning, and everything is protected along the years. For example, the idea of the offices as it appeared in the first projects, Relance Control, for example, or Fred Olsen, and how it was completely transfigured in the project with Fuller for the climate office. But if you look with attention to the climate office, it's possible to see it in many other projects. Willis Faber, you see the same configuration. And there is a continuity, and at the same time, an extension and a diversification of the work. And this is absolutely fascinating.
Here we have a winery, one of several that we've explored, this one in Spain, going back to the roots of a winery, working with gravity, interestingly, avoiding the mechanical interfaces between the movement of grapes. This is a very small project, a chapel for the Vatican in Venice. And again, very much about working with nature. So what you're not seeing here is the extent to which this in reality is overgrown with honeysuckle, which is not only giving the green vegetation, the white flowers, but also very much about the fragrance of the experience. This was a project in Madrid, and we presented this at COP26 as the most sustainable project in the history of the practice. It goes beyond all the normal ratings to truly meet the climate objectives of the Paris Agreement. Interspersed through the galleries are these screens which bring to life, for example, here, the British Museum. So there you see it as it really is, with the people moving through it. And here, the early models showing how we were able to reveal the library by cutting away a lot of excess buildings of no quality at all that had accumulated, and going back in time to the original courtyard, inspired by history.
A certain success of the exhibition depends from the tension between two parameters. The public who don't know a word about the architecture of Norman Foster understand immediately that there is something universal in the work. It's dealing with the world, with all locations of the world, all the program in the world, transportation system, museum we spoke about, in one way. But it's also dealing with an individual, somebody with thinking, who is completely involved in the work. And this tension between the universal and the particular is absolutely fascinating.
This is a project currently under construction for the Prado in Madrid, the Hall of Realms, and it's peeling away the layers of history to reveal the original building, the oldest in Madrid, the original brick facade going back to the 17th century. And then above it, because the roof had to be replaced anyway, creating a flexible big span gallery for contemporary art and temporary exhibitions. The library in Berlin, the so-called Berlin Brain, it's very much about the enclosure which is breathing, is allowing a degree of natural ventilation, controlled natural light. And here you can see the study model of the structure, as it were, the bones of the building. Here we have the Reichstag, which was symbolic of a reunified Germany, and the cupola, which symbolically places the public above the politicians who are responsible to them. So it's an exercise in a zero carbon building. It's a kind of energy manifesto for the future, conceived and built in the 1990s.
The Reichstag is an incredible accomplishment about the idea of democracy and share ideas of societies between politics and people through an architecture, through a building.
And again, in the Reichstag, an insight into the process. So these models give you an idea of some of the versions unbuilt which finally made what is there in reality.
What is important to understand, to deal with this idea of the exhibition, working with Norman, this is the dialogue, the permanent dialogue we had together. I proposed some concept, he kept some of them, he changed some organization, and what was, for example, I give you an example. At the beginning, I saw that it was very important to see realized architecture, and I proposed to have above models and drawings, large screens, to make that the public could be completely involved in the reality of the images of architecture. And at the end, we developed the concept in the larger space, and I was surprised because he told me, I would like to keep only models and drawings and to have project on little screens. And I was a little bit afraid because what will be the apprehension of the public of the reality of architecture through little screens? And it was true. To have this feeling to be involved in the world of the conception through the drawings and models is something else. And I think the public appreciates this a lot.
If individual buildings are important, then I would argue, even though I'm an architect and passionate about the individual building, that the infrastructure of a city which determines its identity, its DNA, think of it as the urban glue which binds the individual buildings together. So that leads us to planning and place, the importance of master planning and the creation of spaces.
An important work of an architect, of an artist, the work in itself, the global work, resists to the interpretation. You can't easily interpret his work. You have to go deeper in the understanding. And I think I tried to do it. And of course, through the months of research, my understanding changed completely. And I tried to share this with Norman.
Then, of course, there's a section on network and mobility, very much about the movement of people, goods, information, whether that's a transmission tower overlooking Barcelona, whether it's an airport in London, in Beijing, in Hong Kong, but looking at ways in which this infrastructure can reduce energy and can work with nature to bring in top light, sunlight, natural ventilation. This model of Stansted is a reminder that this was the beginning of the reinvention of the air terminal, to move all the heavy services, ducts, artificial lighting in the ceiling, and to turn that upside down, to open the roof up to natural light. And that influenced other designers, planners of airports. It became the new model, and different iterations of that by our own teams over time. The latest unbuilt in Mexico, other iterations here in Beijing, in Hong Kong, and Kuwait, a spaceport in New Mexico. Here we have buildings that very much relate to the whole network of mobility, whether it's a charitable project which transforms the education of young people through the discipline of rowing. And here the yacht club in Monaco, and then the yacht club gives way to yachts, gives way to boats, the importance of urban furniture in the streetscape of a city, the mobility of buses, the idea of how you might give a more gentle identity to the filling station. From the design of boats into the world of the future. And our work with NASA on Martian habitats, the European Space Agency on lunar dwellings, and over there, the idea of drone ports for rural Africa. What they all have in common is that you use the local material, the moon dust or the Mars dust called regolith, to mix that with an additive, and then robotically to create dome-like structures which learn from the structure of animal and bones to create quite deep but highly efficient, porous structures that will withstand small meteorites, and the damage can be easily repaired. And then the Norman Foster Foundation in Madrid, working with MIT, with Keynes, the Center for Advanced Nuclear Systems, on the potential for autonomous power, a new generation of nuclear, but rooted in experience from the past, the microreactors.
It seems incredible because, of course, there is the frightness about the nuclear, but it developed a kind of safe project which could be adaptive to societies.
And microreactors are, in many locations, pioneered since the 1960s. But the new generation, something like this, which would fit in a 6-meter container, could power an entire Manhattan block just parked in the basement.
Still no, I don't know how many buildings were realized by Foster Studio. 300 something, 350. How many were studied? 1,000, 1,500. And to go through all those projects is really complex and need a lot of attention. And I'm sure that it will be done by other critics and historians in the next years.
Being able to stand back and see that larger body of work, a retrospective, although one distinguished architectural critic, when I described it as a retrospective, said, no, it's a futurespective, because everything that you've done has always been projecting a vision for the future. Buildings that would be able to adapt and respond to change, and in some ways provoke change, positive change, social change, technological change. Here the Futures section marks the end of the exhibition. For the first time, we can look at works spanning 6 decades, and several themes weave through the models, the drawings, and in most cases, images of finished buildings. There's a quest for light, lightness, and accord with nature to capture the beauty of the sky and views. There's the pursuit since the 1960s of what is now called sustainability in the forms of conserving energy and recycling waste and materials, recycling historic buildings, conserving precious commodity of land and encouraging the pedestrian experience by building compactly to avoid sprawl, respecting and learning from history and tradition. In short, the exhibition shows that we design with an awareness of the past for the needs of the present and to anticipate a future which is essentially unknown.